This is my iPhone 15 Pro, and it has a portrait mode. That portrait mode creates a fake shallow depth of field. But the question is, how does that stack up to shooting a portrait on a full frame camera with an 85mm portrait lens at f1.8? Join me today as we find out. Now, there's no doubt that iPhones and other smartphones are capable of some pretty amazing pictures. But portrait cameras, they're not, which is why they have to have portrait modes built into them. Now, the widest aperture on the main camera of this phone, I believe, is 1.7 or 1.8, but that's on a tiny sensor, so the depth of field is still pretty massive. On the portrait lens, which is around 77mm, the telephoto lens, I think it drops to around 2.2, and the sensor is even smaller. So obviously smartphone companies have to use computational photography to create their shallow depths of field. And today what we're going to do is we're going to pit this iPhone against my Sony A7R V with an 85mm f1.8. We're going to compare how good they are at different apertures. We will shoot from f1.8 through to probably about f11, something like that. And we will shoot this in portrait mode. And then in editing, we will take it down to f8, f11, whatever we can get in the editing. And we will compare the images of all the different apertures between the main camera and the smartphone camera. Now, to do this, I'm going to be the model. Unfortunately, I'm quite a small YouTube channel, so I don't have the budget to hire models. My wife, who is perfectly capable of being a model, is unfortunately working this morning, so you're kind of stuck with me. For the iPhone, I will be triggering it using my Apple Watch. I can frame it and set it up on my Apple Watch and trigger it with my Apple Watch. I'll use a 2-second delay just to make sure that everything's right as I take the picture. And again, on the Sony A7R V, I can reverse the screen and see myself, and I can use the app to trigger again with a 2-second or 5-second countdown. So I'm going to get on and set up the camera. I've picked this particular spot because we've got a fairly nice even background, a fairly dark background, but hopefully that'll punch out in the pictures. The light's not quite up yet. It will come up behind me, so I will position myself in such a way that I get the best looking light on my face. The whole idea, the whole concept of this video is to compare them in a natural environment, not in a studio environment. Most of the people taking portraits on their iPhones, their smartphones, are not taking them in studio situations with setup lighting. They're taking it in places like this and using natural light and natural backgrounds. Now, smartphones like the iPhone, to use computational photography, what they do is they take multiple images, 7, 8, 9, 10 images. They create various maps of contrast and depth, and they put them all together and they work out where the subject is and then separate that subject from the background and make that background blurry. Now, it works in a decent contrast situation fairly well. It's not always great on hair or areas that are vague in contrast, but in general it does work. And we will have a look at that in Lightroom when we get these images back. I will process the iPhone images on the iPhone itself in the Photos app because you've got the most control over that. Then I will export them to Lightroom and we'll have a look at them in Lightroom and compare them alongside the Sony A7R V. I won't do very much editing on any of the images. I will shoot raw on the Sony, so I will edit them to a similar look as the iPhone, and then we will have a look and see what we can get. So join me in the studio and we will catch up and have a look at these images. So welcome back to the studio. As you can see, I've loaded the portraits of my ugly mug into Lightroom. The images that I took on the Sony A7R V are not the greatest. It's missed the focus a couple of times, which is quite ironic after what I've said about the focus. But I suspect it might not actually be the focus. It might actually be, again, the fact that I didn't switch off the image stabilization whilst it was on the tripod. However, most of the images were quite sharp. The lighting was coming directly from my right and causing quite a sort of bit of glare off of my forehead. But I've toned them down and I've tried to match them to the images from the iPhone. Now the iPhone image, I took one particular image. By default it's shot at f2.8. I processed it at f1.8, f2.8, f4, f5.6 and f8. And I matched the images from the Sony A7R V to the same. So we've got f1.8, 2.8, 4, 5, 6 and 8. But they are obviously different images. So let's jump into Lightroom and compare those two images from the 85mm compared to the iPhone portrait mode. So here we have the images in Lightroom side by side. On the left I have the Sony A7R V and on the right you have the portrait mode on the iPhone. As I said earlier, the iPhone I shot on the telephoto lens at roughly 77mm f2.2 lens. It's 12 megapixels, so it's not the highest resolution. The main camera has a 48 megapixel lens, but I don't think in terms of computational photography the actual size of the image or the pixel density is going to make a huge lot of difference. Down here you see I have the Sony A7R V in red and I have the iPhone images in blue, and we've got 1.8, 2.8, 4, 5, 6 and 8. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in close at 100% to the hair. Now you can see I'm not particularly sharp in the eye there. It's sharp enough, but it's not fantastic. And I'll do the same here. And the first thing that really strikes you is how much over sharpened the iPhone image is. I've done no processing other than to output it at f1.8. And this is an HEIC file. You can't shoot Pro RAW on the portrait mode as far as I can see. But as you can see, if we look around the hairline here, we go to the top here, my hair on the iPhone is sharp, 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 unsharp. It's very, very little graduation between the areas that are sharp and the areas that are unsharp. Whereas on the Sony A7R V and the 85mm, we've got sharp hair here and it graduates out of focus. And if you look in a little bit more detail at the hair that's sticking up at the back of my head here, you can see it's become quite undefined. If I zoom in to 200% on the iPhone image, you can see that there's areas where it hasn't picked up at all and areas where it's very, very undefined. So if we come back, and I want to show you another little area here which I noticed. We'll look down the side of my jacket here, and as you can see, I'm a cat owner, so I've got cat hairs all over my jacket, and you can still see them out of focus here. You can see them there, you can see them there, you can see around my arm here. But more importantly, I want you to have a look at the line of my jacket here. It's well defined, it's separated from the background, it's out of focus as you'd expect because it's behind my eye line at f1.8, but it's well defined. Now if we do the same to the iPhone here, you will see it's very, very different. There's a lot of curving and estimation as to what my arm should look like. It's very, very different. I'll zoom out to show you the full frame. You can see that that cutting out there is very, very poorly done. And this area here, as you can see, is quite a low contrast. The iPhone has boosted the contrast here by using computational photography, but that's in order to try and cut it out and separate it from the background. You can see the original lighting here, the contrast is very, very low, and the iPhone hasn't dealt with it at all, whereas optically the 85mm has done it absolutely perfectly. Whilst we're here, we'll have a quick look at the bokeh. If we just zoom into this area here, they're not identically lined up, but the background is fundamentally the same. And again, you see there's a very, very smooth graduation between the areas that are out of focus on the Sony A7R V. It's very, very subtle. It looks very, very natural. Whereas on the iPhone, it's very harsh, and also there's quite a lot of noise in that image where the post-processing has been done and the merging of the image. I'm not quite sure why, but the ISO on this image is at 160. It's not very high. It's very, very noisy without me doing any post-production to it. The Sony A7R V, on the other hand, I've done quite a bit of editing to, with the exception of any sharpening. I've not sharpened the image, but as you can see, the difference is literally night and day between the way the bokeh looks and the noise. And I think it really shows up. If I zoom in quite tight on my face here, it's massively over sharpened and very, very noisy in the shadow areas of my eye socket. Whereas if I do the same here to my Sony, there's no noise in the shadow area of my eye socket. The graduations are much, much more subtle. There's no sharpening applied. I can do that in post-production without any issue and sharpen it up. So out of interest, let's just have a look at the f2.8 images. And we'll zoom in a little bit. As you can see, it's a lot sharper on the 2.8. Whether the focus just missed that particular time, I don't know. However, it just isn't looking good if you blow this iPhone image up. Again, going around the hairline, it's very, very sharp here, and then just subtly graduates away to the hairline at the back, where you still got detail, you've still got some subtlety there. Whereas on this one, it's sharp, 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 unsharp. And again, the bokeh in the background, it's much softer. And again, we're seeing noise here in this image. If we come down to the iPhone down the side here, the noise is quite dramatic. And at 2.8 processing, the bokeh is really, or the fake bokeh, should I say, is very, very ugly when compared to that of the Sony. We'll just go to, let's say, f5.6 and have a look at those. And this, I think, is actually quite interesting because you can see the background is coming in a little bit more in focus, but it looks so much more natural on the Sony A7R V with the 85mm. This looks forced. It almost looks like it's been put out of focus and then slightly resharpened. It doesn't look natural at all. And again, the whole image looks over sharpened. We still have not quite so much issue with the separation from the background, but there's still this very strange looking edge to my arm here, whereas you just don't have that there. So as you can see, in conclusion, the iPhone does a reasonable job of cutting the subject out of the background and making the background blur, but there is a very, very defined line where that blur comes in, and it's not a natural look. Now, if you're looking at the iPhone on a screen or on a social media post, then the portrait mode's probably going to be absolutely fine. But if you look at it as a print, say printing it 8 by 10 inches, you're really going to start to see that over sharpening and that noise in the shadow areas. It's really, really quite prominent. And your eye may well be drawn to the areas where the cutting out, the isolation from the background really hasn't worked, particularly in areas of low contrast. The 85mm portrait lens, on the other hand, at f1.8, it's very, very graduated, as you would expect. It's a very, very natural looking image. If you're going to do large format prints, then really the way to go is with a full size camera. It doesn't have to be full frame, but an APS-C or a micro four thirds would work absolutely fine, with a dedicated portrait lens and proper depth of field. It's not so much about the way that the image is separated from the background. It's about how the images are over sharpened and that graduation from the background to the foreground or from the background to the subject. It's just not there. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I found it very interesting to do this little test. If you want to see any more comparisons between iPhones and full frame cameras, let me know. You might have seen a short that I've done recently. I've just bought the 20 to 40mm Tamron f2.8 and I'm really looking forward to taking that out. I'm going to take it to the Beamish Museum next week and do some photography and video with it. And then in 1.5 weeks time, I shall be in London for 7 days on a photographic and video stock shoot. And I'm really looking forward to putting it through its paces there, particularly on my DJI gimbal. So anyway, hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, a like would be fantastic, a subscription would be even better, and I will see you in the next one.